You're now listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing.
Anything can happen Friday. The art and cultural side of Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're with Gowri here today on your Anything Can Happen Friday on a Friday morning. And with me today, I will be speaking to Kamini Ramachandran, who is the co-founder of Moonshadow Stories, who is also a professional storyteller. And she's been telling stories all around the world, and she's going to share the art of storytelling here with us. And she's joining us all the way from Singapore. Hello, Kamini.
Hi, Gowri. Nice to speak to you again.
Nice to speak to you too. And thank you so much for joining us on our breakfast show.
You're welcome. Looking forward to this.
And perhaps a little introduction to yourself and to your work. How exactly did you discover your love for storytelling?
I think it goes a long way back, a long time ago, to when I was a very young child, about the age of 3, 4, when I was staying with my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very, very lucky and blessed to have a grandfather who was a natural storyteller.
All right.
So every day, every night, week after week, month after month, year after year, I heard him share stories.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke to me in Malayalam, my mother tongue language.
Oh, okay.
He spoke to me in English. He threw in all the Sanskrit words and chants and mantras, and he also threw in whatever bit of Malay that he knew at that time.
Right.
So I kind of grew up with that background that was rich and filled with stories without really knowing that it was actually a kind of apprenticeship with my grandfather, who was a master storyteller himself.
Okay.
And then, of course, I read a lot. I had parents who believed in the power of books and never ever skimped or stinged on any of our requests to buy books or magazines or anything that had to do with reading.
Right.
So maybe, my primary and secondary years were really influenced by the stories that I read.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went and studied English language and literature in UK, which really, is more reading, more stories, though they were the classics and things like that.
Yes.
And when I had my own sons, that's when I decided to do a kind of a shift from focusing on writing and becoming more of a teller of words.
Right.
Because I realized that in preschools, they were not being told stories. They were actually being read aloud to, which is perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. But I also feel that there needs to be a balance between the reading aloud and the actual oral tradition of telling a story to a child. Yeah. So that's when I realized that I carried this wealth, a big repertoire inherited from my grandfather, and I needed to do something about it. And I began to share as a teller in schools, in preschools, to parents with children, and it just snowballed from there.
Right. And why did you think that it was important to have a balance between telling a story and reading a story?
Definitely, because at that young age, if you're looking at the toddler, preschooler age, you can't expect children to sit still in one place for more than 7 minutes, in my experience, right? So you have to make that process where you use literature, whether it's written literature or oral literature, you have to make that process accessible to them visually, orally, and also in a very kinesthetic way where you use expressions and gesture and movement. So that's why I think there is a place for reading aloud, and then after that you put the book away and you tell another story, or you retell the same story, but it becomes more animated and interactive between you and the child or the children. And, you ask them to fill in the words, or they take on roles, or they become all the sound effects in the story, or they contribute and they create their own, inputs, and objects and symbols can change, the ending can change, so you have more fun with it, and you encourage the child to speak. Whereas with reading, you're the only one reading, and you're the only one speaking. The child is very passive as a listener, right? It's wonderful to acquire language and acquire, new word skills, because they're also looking at the words in the picture book. But at the same time, I think most parents and educators need to learn to put that book away and not hold on to it as a crutch, Trust in your voice and your tales, and in the power of the story to engage the child.
And you said you got most of your influence from your grandfather.
Yep.
Yeah. Was he a storyteller as well, or did he just like sharing stories with the grandchildren?
You know, I think all of us are storytellers. We all have personal tales, cultural tales, heritage stories. All those things make us storytellers if we care to actually share it in the form of a story, you know. So I wouldn't call my grandfather the kind of storyteller that I am now. He was just a natural storyteller. He was filled with tales, comic tales, dark tales, all kinds of tales, tales about our family back in Kerala, tales about the Japanese War, tales about his emigration from India to Malaya at that time, and then, of course, tales about all his children. I mean, one of them is my mom, of course, right? Yes. And then the entire Ramayana, the whole Mahabharata, the Jataka tales, the Panchatantra, and all the other folk tales from India. So I guess he grew up in a tradition and culture that gave him that oral literature as a big asset, right?
Right.
And that was already in him. And when he shared the stories with us, it was a mix of both the epics and legends and mythology, as well as family and personal tales that were true.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, yes, he is he's my grandfather, and he's also a storyteller.
Right.
But, you know, if he were here today, he'd be laughing and saying, this is really different how you're doing it, you know.
And I find it really intriguing because you said he actually told you guys the entire Ramayana story orally. Is that right?
Yes. So he would tell it in segments.
Ah, okay.
So the Ramayana, you know, has traveled from India to most of the ASEAN and Asian countries. We all have our own versions of it through dance, mask, shadow puppetry, all kinds of ways that we appreciate that big epic. But he'd tell it in small doses, and the older I was, the complicated parts of the plot, the branch stories, adventures, and the subplots, he began to explore that a lot more, you see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a very long story, and I think what my parents did was they just put on a CD and asked us to watch it because it was much
generation
easier.
Is the CD generation. I had none of that.
Okay, that's true as well. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about the different platforms that were available. Because in Singapore, that's when you started out trying to be a professional storyteller. How was it like in the beginning?
Well, this would be more than 10, 12 years ago in Singapore. There was no organized association or society. So in 2006, I was one of the founding members of the Storytelling Association of Singapore, which will celebrate its 10th anniversary next year. And we had smaller informal storytelling circles at that point. And what the association did was provide a platform for professionalizing of storytelling as a practice, as an applied practice, as well as an art form. So I think that has provided like a space for anyone who wants to meet like-minded people, who wants to listen to stories, and then slowly when they kind of understand what it's all about, begin to start telling in a very safe and supportive environment.
Right.
And then if they really wish to continue on a full-time professional path, it also offers that kind of membership category of our voting professional members, you see. So, yes, it's been a journey, and being part of, part of the association as a founding member, it just gets bigger, and, there are more complications to deal with because more people want to join, and it's recognized, and so we have to think about how we take the association forward. But at the same time, I think, when I co-founded Moonshadow Stories, my aim was to actually focus on storytelling for adult audiences and as an art form. I wasn't too interested in all the applications in curriculum and teaching language and uses in school. My heart always was in the way my grandfather told it to me.
Okay.
And the, references to shadow puppetry and to Kathakali and all the other forms that were highly performative. So for me, storytelling from the beginning was an art form. it was never something that a teacher did in school with a book.
Okay.
So I wanted to demystify what storytelling actually was being perceived as here.
So you don't carry a book as well when you tell your stories?
Never. There's no book.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you hear me tell a folk tale or a fairy tale or a legend, it will be different because it is tailored to how much time I have, who my audience is at that time and space, and what's the purpose of telling the story, you know. So that's why it's important to know the bigger stories and to know them like the back of your hand so you can adapt it to suit the kind of audience and space that you're in every single time it changes. Because with storytelling, we don't have the fourth wall that you find in theater.
That's right.
And most of the time, it's a very intimate act between you and your listeners, and you weave them into the process of storytelling. There's a lot of things that you will address to them, asking them questions, going in and out of the audience, and especially with children, they are highly interactive, and I make them a part of the process. It's almost like we co-create the story. So, of course, it differs, right? I mean, my morning session will be different to my afternoon, let alone the next week and next month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you tell stories not only to children, but also to adults.
Yep, I do.
So
I enjoy both. Yeah.
Do you use the same repertoire, or do you have to change it up a little bit to suit the adult audience?
It's completely different most of the time.
Okay.
The adult storytelling repertoire allows me to really breathe life into untold stories that are just lying around in someone's heart and mind simply because it has never been written down. And these would be the tribal tales or the tales that are lesser known that you would find in a journal or in some kind of ethnographic study.
Right.
And then I also make sure that I don't tamper with the stories.
Okay.
So, yeah, I make sure I tell my audience. I mean, in all my programs, there is references and sources and citations. And I'm very clear that this story that you're hearing now is a version adapted from all the things that I've mentioned that have influenced my research in the story.
Right.
And so I don't like Disneyfying and sanitizing the tales to make it pleasant or acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why the adult storytelling repertoire is very different to the ones that I do for children. Because again, attention span, and you don't expect your adults to be clapping and creating thunderstorm and all that, you see.
Right.
I want them to think, and I want them to understand that the problems that we shared centuries ago are still valid, and we're still grappling with that. You know, the issues with women, issues with family, issues with the supernatural, the things that we don't see, issues with why the world is the way it is, natural disasters. Nothing's changed, you know, from the beginning when tales were told. We're still wondering why and trying to figure out how to deal with all these things.
Okay, so we are going to take a short break. When we come back, we will discuss more about the art of storytelling in Southeast Asia itself.
Thank you, Gowri.
Anything can happen Friday. The art and cultural side of Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're still with Gowri here on your Anything Can Happen Friday with Durian ASEAN. And with me, I have Kamini Ramachandran, who is joining me today all the way from Singapore. And she's, of course, the co-founder of Moonshadow Stories and also a professional storyteller. So going back to that, I think it's not every day that you hear someone saying, I tell stories for a living. And you're probably one of the lucky ones who get to do that. You get to live out your passion. So tell us, how was it like starting out? Of course, you mentioned in Singapore you started out almost 10 to 12 years ago. And how was the reaction like from people when you tell them that you're a professional storyteller?
I think the first thing that used to happen in more than a decade ago is, oh, you work with small children in a school, oh, you teach in a library, oh, you read. And then I had to kind of sit them down and explain no, in what I do. And then when I come to the part where I say I do storytelling for adults and I have a program next week or next month and would you like to come, literally you see the jaw drop. You know.
Okay.
And they're like, what do you mean storytelling for adults? And I'm like, well, if the story has no ending and it's up to you to figure it out, or if the story is full of sex and violence and horror, that is storytelling for adults. If the story has a story within a story, a plot within a plot, twist after twist, and it takes 90 minutes to tell and to engage you, that's storytelling for adults. Come and listen and find out for yourself.
Right. And do they actually show up?
They did, of course. Yeah, we had full houses. We were known to have people standing outside the door.
Wow, okay.
I must say that when we started, we chose a performance venue. We chose the substation in Armenian Street. And they were extremely supportive of us because no one had done storytelling as a performance before. And so they were perfectly happy to take us on and to see how we would do. And this is way back in 2005.
Okay.
So, yeah, these were all our adult sessions. I'm not talking about the sessions for children. So we had many curious people come, and then they came again and again because we had thematic storytelling evenings. So you wouldn't hear the same thing. You would always hear new repertoire.
Okay.
And, so I think it was always something that we knew that there was a target audience that appreciated this and wanted this. How could we keep up with that demand personally in creating repertoire, and at the same time also making it manageable for us, because I also enjoyed teaching and training and workshopping in storytelling, and I also enjoyed working with young children and educators and parents. So it was trying to find the balance between the performance art storytelling and the applied art storytelling.
And speaking of storytelling itself, it's definitely not something that's new. I mean, we've had this probably since hundreds of years ago. And even in Malaysia, if we look back at the traditional theatre history, we have a lot of it started out with storytellers as well, where they would just sit down with their bowls, making little noises, trying to make the story interesting for the young people or just for people in the village, those who want to kill time. And how is your way of storytelling different from this?
I think, the fact that most traditional storytellers started in a village or in a society or community as the elder, the wise person, the tradition bearer, the wisdom keeper, Penglipur Lara, the soothsayer, all these things, our Awang Batil and all that. They were respected and they earned their living through the number of stories that they told. And many of the traditional storytellers would stop halfway and basically say that, the joss stick has burnt down. If you want to hear the next part, someone has got to put another coin and I will light another joss stick.
Right.
So it was durational, right? So what has changed? I still work and expect to be paid. Storytelling is not for free.
Yes.
Right? Same as how it started. However the payment was made those days, whether it was with fabric, cloth, something to wear, food, something to fill your tummy, or shelter, right? And then it progressed into gold coins or silver coins, and when you told in the court of a king or in a palace, it was completely different. That's not changed. Storytellers still get paid.
Right.
We are perhaps not healers and community elders anymore. We are in a contemporary situation. But we do create a little village of listeners. We do create a little community of our audience every time we start weaving our magic with words, And then I find the biggest commonality is that I am still trying to share culture and explain the universe.
Yes.
And explain traditions and heritage practices through my stories with my audience. And this was fundamentally the role of a traditional storyteller or a shaman or a wise elder, to impart culture and local practices, you see, through their folk tales. I'm still doing that, but I'm doing it to a very global audience, a multicultural audience. And so my repertoire has to be strong enough to address a country like Malaysia and Singapore, where you have multiple races and religions and backgrounds with you, you see?
And I know you've performed in a lot of festivals all around the world, but let's just talk about Singapore and Malaysia for a while. Are there a lot of other storytellers around, and how has the responses been so far from these two countries?
We do have a thriving storytelling network in Southeast Asia. Singapore hosts the Singapore International Storytelling Festival, which is almost in its 10 years. And it started off with the Asian Congress of Storytellers, which is 15 years old. In Indonesia, there are various storytelling festivals. They call it Festival Dongeng, and you have them in Jakarta, in Bandung, in different places, you know. And then you have, in Thailand, there is a regular storytelling festival that takes place in the north, in the University of Mahasarakam. But there are also other ad hoc festivals that take place in different parts of Thailand, organized by different platforms. Malaysia has had festivals on an international platform, and then they have the individual, smaller scale festivals that feature storytellers who are suitable for children in preschools or for early childhood educators. So there are lots of pockets of storytelling activities that go on in Southeast Asia. Sometimes you find that storytelling in countries like Vietnam and Cambodia may be actually platformed as puppetry festivals or puppetry events.
Okay.
Right? So there is this gray area that a lot of storytelling practitioners traditionally used puppets, small, big, large, you know, water puppets, whatever, shadow puppets.
Right.
So you cannot discount that and say that is not storytelling, because the puppets don't just appear without any story. Right? So we have to also think about in Jogja how many big puppet festivals they have in 1 year, right? And of course, all of ASEAN has their version of puppetry festivals. So I think that speaks for itself that stories are being told in dialects, in ASEAN languages, and what needs to be done now to prevent this whole thing from disappearing is to have some level of good translation, hopefully done by a storyteller or a puppeteer himself, because the way you would translate and the way you would empathize with the storytelling language, and you understand that it's meant to be spoken to a living audience, not written in a closed book that you read as a solo activity. So I think focus has to be on that level of translation and mentorship, where you work with someone from a different culture, and the ability to share the tales from your tradition and culture with interested parties, and not complaining and waiting for the day that someone from your tribe wants to take over your stories. Because that is dangerous, you see.
And tell us about your experience while performing outside of Southeast Asia. Like, for example, you participated at the Sydney International Storytelling Conference, one in Rome, Belgium. How were these different from the ones in Asia?
The ones in Europe, they focus a lot in their own European languages. So those of us who come in and speak in English, like we have a translator. The one in Rome, the Raccontamento Storia International Storytelling Festival, had storytellers who worked with me before the performance and who were there together with me, shared the same stage. And so I would speak in English, she would speak in Italian. I would speak in English, she would speak in Italian.
Simultaneously, was it?
Yes, but she would also move, and she would also try to imitate my gestures and embody. So that preparation and the fact that she was a storyteller, you know, really, really helped with the audience, because I've seen where you just have a person standing at a podium just narrating in English and summarizing, and the energy dips for the audience. And then in Aldenwiesen, in the Storytelling Castle, there is no translation, because the way the Belgian festival is focused is that those storytellers who speak in a non-European language are here to speak in English, simply because we have audiences who want to learn English, improve upon their English, who are at intermediate or advanced levels of English classes, and they want to hear a native speaker speak in English.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's different. But in Scotland, at the Scottish International Storytelling Festival in Edinburgh, most of us spoke in English. But then, of course, you have their own dialects, right?
Right.
So that's what I find intriguing, that each country is very different. And the kind of tellers they invite is also different, because it has to cater to the audience that attends this festival, and the artistic director and the organizer knows the audience better than any one of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to think of any other festivals that I can think of. The oldest festival in the UK, the oldest storytelling festival,
okay.
is a festival at the Edge. It's about 23 years old, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's in a big field, and we tell in tents or open air.
All right.
Yeah. So, again, it's a completely different experience, because everybody's camping and staying there for the whole long weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And you live with your audience literally day and night. And so the energy is different, and most of the stories told are in English. There was no translation, nothing. I think that's simply because of the function that it was held in the UK,
Right. That sounds more like a music festival, where you just camp there and then you just listen to music, from morning all the way to the wee hours at night. But instead of that, you listen to stories.
You listen to stories, and we have musicians who accompany us or who are there.
Mm-hmm.
And, we also go late into the night with campfire tales outdoor in the cold, and you're bundled up, and there's this big fire, and you tell spooky ghost horror stories.
Okay. So before we take another break, I just want to ask you, if I want to indulge myself in storytelling, which country would you recommend that I should go to, or which country has the best storytelling festival?
That's a tough one, because it would really depend on
what kind of stories you would like.
Kind of stories you want to hear, and also whether you're bringing kids along, and whether you're looking for a family audience-centric festival, or you're looking at something that is more for an adult audience.
Okay.
So I can't say country or festival. I would say, like any kind of aficionado, you make sure you eat at all these places, you look at all these paintings, you attend all these concerts. You don't restrict yourself to KL or Singapore and just what it has to offer. At some point, you will aim to go listen to things and look at things and eat things elsewhere, right?
Yes, that's
right. The same with storytelling. So I would say that start with ASEAN. It's accessible, it's close by and affordable. And then spread your wings and go to Australia, New Zealand, the US, UK. All the Nordic countries have very regular festivals.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So that's a very good suggestion as well. Thank you. So we will take another short break. When we come back, we will talk about the other ways of applying storytelling.
Anything can happen Friday. The art and cultural side of Southeast Asia.
Hello and welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're with Gowri here on your Anything Can Happen Friday on DuranASEAN.com, the voice of discovery and sharing. And with me, I am speaking to Kamini Ramachandran today, who is joining us all the way from Singapore. She is a professional storyteller and also the co-founder of Moonshadow Stories. So, apart from storytelling and attending festivals, you also do a lot of other works on the side, such as teaching, and you've also worked with some clinical psychiatrists and trying to apply storytelling in the form of therapy. Can you tell us more about that?
Yep. I teach storytelling in different contexts, applied contexts, and one of the areas is in art therapy or in counseling or in healing. And I have to make clear that I always work with a co-facilitator who is a counselor, therapist, or trained clinical psychiatrist. I am the artist in these sessions, the storyteller. So the stories are from me, and I sit and I talk to my facilitator and figure out what their needs are, and then from my repertoire I select the stories. And the way I tell it is also important because of what outcomes or what aims they have.
Right.
And I make it very clear that I'm not qualified, I'm not the therapist or the counselor here, but there's a lot of value in learning to co-facilitate with an artist in any application. And even as an educator or, whatever it is that you do, if you collaborate with an artist and that art form is suitable to your work, you can really reach out to your audience in a very different way. So my work with art therapy also extends to working with postgraduate students at LaSalle College of the Arts, where they have a module on figuring out how to create and select appropriate stories when they are working with very young children. And so my experience working with the preschool, early childhood age comes in, and I've done a lot of voluntary work with underprivileged children, youth at risk, children in care homes and in community centers. And so you don't go in there to entertain and amuse. It is a very different role when you enter a space like that as a storyteller.
Right.
And you have a lot of other issues, discipline, attention. You don't know the child, so you have to be very careful about what you choose, what you don't want them to be hurt or upset or to have nightmares, because they'll never see you again. You only come in there once and you leave.
Yes.
So content selection and how to be understanding and considerate and not just think that, my repertoire will work,
Okay.
That's important. And the power of story to heal, the power of story to calm, the power of story to soothe, this has been very well documented.
Okay.
And, if you think back to bedtime stories, most of us never heard the whole story. We fell asleep halfway through. And that's how it heals and calms and, can lower your heartbeat and just make you escape into a different imaginary world that can take you away from a particular kind of stress or issue or problem momentarily.
Okay.
And then, of course, stories that have values and teaching and lessons in it are a very non-threatening way of approaching a situation where you're not looking at the client or the person and talking about them and using the word you. Here we talk about characters in a story and we can discuss it objectively in a very neutral way, yet that same issue is being raised.
Okay, and I think it's very interesting because what you mentioned about bedtime stories, because it does have a very calming effect on us, and it also works a lot with the child's imagination, and I think that sort of stretches their imagination and help them to think more and become more critical as well. And even in schools, there used to be a lot of storytelling competitions, but only for like Teachers' Day or Children's Day, specific occasions like that. But then when you go to high school, you don't really get that anymore.
You're right. And, I'm not very fond of competitions, but at least it's one way of getting storytelling to be, to happen and to get a lot of people to be involved. It should be, like you said, something that happens on a daily basis and is something that is part of school and part of daily life, where parents and caregivers are also empowered to share stories, or at least there is a place for children and people to go to listen to stories regularly. In that way, I think Singapore has done a wonderful job in providing storytelling spaces in libraries and community centers, and the National Arts Council encourages storytelling programs under all their programming capacities. And there's a lot of storytelling that is free for the public. So, if they're not sure, they can actually come for a few sessions and see what this is all about. We also have storytelling in different languages, Tamil, Malay, and English, to cater for the mother tongue language storytelling. So it takes time to get it to this level where it is part of school, part of community, part of the art scene. It's something that is not rare and difficult to find.
Right.
And so applied storytelling has its place in society.
And I think it's definitely shouldn't be something that is rare, like what you said, because after all, storytelling is something that dates back to maybe even thousands of years. It's something that we are actually, that we see a lot, but we probably don't realize it as much, that, hey, this is actually storytelling. Like what you mentioned about the bedtime story, or even in class when the teacher is trying to teach you a lesson. I think that is a form of storytelling as well, but at times it doesn't get so interesting. But I want to ask you, what if there are young people now who want to get involved in storytelling? Is there a place where they can actually learn and master this art?
Yes, there is. Storytelling has become an integral module in performance studies.
Mm-hmm.
In LaSalle College of the Arts, I've been doing this for the last 4 years. And so if you want to study it properly as an academic subject in the world of performing arts, it's offered here in LaSalle. If not, there are plenty of workshops and courses that happen randomly, ad hoc, that you can do. So, it's about finding the right facilitator with enough experience and seeing what is accessible to you and for your needs. But there are also informal platforms where spoken word is used a lot, In Singapore, we have Story Slam. We have Telling Tales Live. In the association, we have our very regular storytelling socials where anyone can come and tell a story or listen to others telling stories.
Right.
So these are entry points, to see whether this is something that you want to do or you want to try out your first storytelling, whether you wish to receive feedback or not. All those things, there are enough things happening where it makes it accessible for someone just venturing into storytelling.
Mm-hmm. And could you have a focus, like I want to major only in adult storytelling, or I only want to tell stories to children?
Generally, I think my advice to anyone that I mentor is you should try for both.
Okay.
Because if you want to make this a full-time practice, you cannot just wait for the children's needs or the adult requests.
Okay.
If you want to make yourself viable.
Exactly.
But, of course, telling to children is not everybody's cup of tea, and it is harder than telling to adults.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, it is what you want to do, where your focus lies. So think about it. My training will prepare you for both, but most people will specialize in areas that they are comfortable in. I mean, many people don't want to tell as a performance storyteller or be on a platform. They're happy to go back to school or to their enrichment center or their speech and drama plays and tell stories only within the capacity of their daily working lives.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as stories are being told, I think that is good. It's important that practice is continued. Not everybody wants to be a performing artist who is a storyteller.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we just make that distinction that anyone can be storytellers.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything coming up? Any storytelling festival? Any events that you have that people can look up?
Well, if you are looking at something in Singapore, end of November on the 28th, at the Esplanade as part of their Indian Arts Festival called Kala Utsavam, I'll be doing a special performance festival commission for family audiences, so children aged 4 to 8 years old.
Okay.
It's called Hanuman, the Tale Behind the Name. So it's a special multidisciplinary storytelling performance where there is visual art that's being done live. There's live musicians and live dancers, and then you hear my voice tell the story of Hanuman's childhood.
Okay.
So this doesn't deal with the Ramayana part of Hanuman. It is more about what he did as a little child and the antics he got up to and how did he get all those powers that he was blessed with and who were his parents. So it's the backstory of Hanuman from a child's point of view, but with music, dance, and visual arts.
Okay.
And that's November the 28th at Kala Utsavam at the Esplanade in Singapore.
And this is in English?
Completely in English,
Okay.
yes.
And do you only tell stories in English, or do you have other languages?
I do tell stories in Malay as well.
Okay.
I'm fluent with that. A lot of my Indian storytelling sessions are peppered with Indian words, Tamil words, Malayalam words, Sanskrit phrases. So I don't eliminate names of kings and queens because to most people it's a tongue twister, but to me it's easy, and I think it's essential that you educate the audience that they should know their Yudhishthira from their Duryodhana and things like that,
Okay. So thank you very much, Kamini, for sharing with us about the art of storytelling. It was a very insightful interview. It was very nice talking to you.
Thank you so much, Gowri.